Unfortunately, I was not one of those kids who was obsessed with movies growing up. So I didn't sit there studying Kubrick or watching French New Wave like the auteurs say they did. And it was actually watching the behind the scenes for the Lord of the Rings films that got me hooked, because I became obsessed with the craft, seeing the scale, the problem solving, the people making impossible things happen on camera, and how you could take something in your head and turn it into reality. But I found this passion a little too late, and I was guided into studying something more academic at university instead of going to film school. And when I decided partway through it to pick up a camera again and give this a proper go, I had no knowledge, no real experience, no industry connections, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. 10 years later, I've had short films win multiple festivals, worked for the BBC, had projects featured on Amazon Prime and Netflix, and have forged a very sustainable career as a self-shooting director. So I don't want this to be a film school is useless video. It's just talking about what's worked for me instead and how I got to where I am without it. Just to be very clear, I am not anti-film school. Some of my closest friends and colleagues within the industry went to film schools, and I know they got so much out of it. And I'm definitely a bit jealous of some of those things, because film school gives you structure, it gives you support, it gives you community, and it's a period of time where you're in this little bubble surrounded by other like-minded creatives, totally focusing on the craft and being supported by other experts in the industry. And lots of people come out the other end of film school and continue working for years with the collaborators that they met during film school, and even get recognized for their work during final year showcases that can open doors for them. However, what I personally think is the biggest debate around this right now is the cost, because the reality is that almost everything you learn in film school, you can learn online now, which brings me on to how I taught myself. But I very much appreciate this approach isn't right for everyone. For some people, being in an environment like film school, surrounded by others doing the same thing and being given support and guidance, is a far better way of learning and more in line with their personality type than rummaging around the vast sea of information on the internet trying to teach yourself, which in a very condensed version is exactly what I did. So going back to my second year at university, when I decided to give filmmaking a proper go, the first thing I did was consume relentlessly. And I didn't just watch all the classics and the great films, I also watched terrible ones on purpose to try and work out why they didn't work. And I pause and rewind and analyze scenes frame by frame, trying to figure out why something made me feel the way it did, or how they achieved a certain effect or look. I print out scripts and read them whilst watching too. And I try and find as many interviews with filmmakers and directors' commentaries and behind the scenes or making of documentaries that I could to get a better peek behind the curtain at it all. I also read endless books as well, and not just on filmmaking, but on screenwriting and business and psychology, things like Blink of an Eye, Making Movies, Rebel Without a Crew, Shot by Shot, Save the Cat, essentially anything I could get my hands on. And lastly, although there wasn't quite the wealth of content online as there is now, I definitely consumed all the staples at the time, like Film Riot, Indie Mogul, Every Frame a Painting, Rocket Jump. And now, of course, there are so many more incredible filmmakers out there sharing their experience and knowledge. And I'll put a link below to the ones that I follow now, who I think are really doing a fantastic job of passing this education on to the next generation of filmmakers. So I basically treated this all like a second degree, but having a load of information doesn't do a lot if you don't go out there and actually start making things. So I'm going to put a link here to my first ever short film so you can see exactly where I started. And it's not good at all, but I learned more lessons making that first short film than from reading and consuming all the information that I did. And that's really the key point here. I just kept making things, but with intention, and I set deadlines and forced myself to finish things no matter how rough they were. And after every single one, I do like a post-mortem of what worked and what didn't, and then what I do differently next time. And I think this is probably the biggest pitfall I see so many filmmakers fall into. They either don't iterate fast enough and spend years and years on like a single project, wanting it to be absolutely perfect, or they don't really learn and grow with each project and actively assess where they could improve and carry that learning forward. So just as an example, and this is in no way a massive achievement or anything to shout about, but within a year, I'd gone from making my very first music video, which was absolutely atrocious, to having a music video featured on MTV. Not that I think now the one that I'm referring to is anything incredible at all, but at the time it was a big achievement, and having had no background in film and being totally self-taught and looking at the first one I made compared to that one, that was significant progress. But that progress only happened through making dozens of music videos in between that and then actively assessing and learning with each one. So there is one other thing that I did that you really can't replicate in a classroom, and that is getting onto real world sets. And I did as much of this as I could too. Watching real crews under pressure, seeing how DPs communicate, how directors talk to contributors and actors, or how producers solve impossible problems is really where you start to understand how the industry works. I've done a separate video about working for free to gain experience. I'll link that here. But the short version is that I reckon you'll learn more in 2 weeks on a real set than 2 years spent in film school or just learning about the theory. And what you get on real world sets as opposed to film school is you see how different types of sets operate as well, and how different filmmakers work and run those sets. And through that process, you start to pick up what might work, what doesn't work, what style of leadership and environment you like or don't like. And that sort of allows you to take the best bits from lots of different experiences and crew and start piecing together how you want to approach things, which leads me very nicely onto our last point, which is all about developing your own taste. So once you've got your technical foundations down, what ends up defining your career, especially if you're directing, but also if you're a DP, is your taste. Because once everyone has the same skills and tools, the main thing that can differentiate you is your creative opinion and that subjective viewpoint that you have. Your sense of story, of tone, of pacing, of composition, that all defines the tone. And there's a great video by the Wandering DP who talks about this in more depth that I'll link to here. But developing taste takes time. You really have to understand what moves you, what doesn't, and why. You have to experiment, riff on ideas, absorb, reinterpret, and build your own voice from what inspires you. This definitely is an ongoing process, and not to sound cliche about it, it's one of those it's a journey, not a destination situations. And I am still absolutely in the continuous process of refining my taste and tone and style too. But ultimately, having a distinct voice and vision, and crucially being able to articulate that, is what's going to help separate you from the crowd of other filmmakers out there.